The Philippines was all I had imagined and more. 2 years ago, I sat in you guys' places and I watched the presentation that Dennis had made of the Philippines, and from that moment I knew that I really, really wanted to make that trip someday. So this year, I, through God's grace, was given the opportunity to make the trip, which I was very, very thankful for. As the time approached, it was very difficult leaving home. I just had a new baby brother, so it was a little hard, and a lot of things were going on, and the devil kind of had me discouraged about the trip a little bit. It was just seemed like it was at the wrong timing. But the moment I stepped off the plane and met Brother Jet and Sister Judith at the airport, it was all forgotten. The people, you've heard this, I'm sure, many, many times, but they are just so friendly and welcoming, and they just did all in their power to make you comfortable. We had 2 cooks that were just assigned to the American group, and they would fix us meals so that we didn't have to eat the Filipino food because they knew that that wasn't our favorite. So it was just amazing seeing people who had so little giving up so much of their time, so much of their resources for us. I definitely wasn't expecting that. I stayed about 10 minutes from the church at Brother Arnold's house and Sister Annie. And every morning I would wake up and take a tricycle to church, which was a motorcycle with a little sidecar attached to it, which was Filipino size, so it didn't quite, you kind of had to duck a little bit. And then towards the end of the trip, Dennis convinced me to ride on the back of the motorcycle. And I was a little hesitant at first, but that was actually a little bit more comfortable. I had met one of the Filipino young women. She was 14 years old, Sister Sarah Rose Marzan. We had met through Facebook a few months earlier, so we had been chatting online and things like that. And when I got there, she was one of the first people who came to my house, and she just spent all week with me. Every service, she'd come and see if I was doing all right, if I wanted to go home and take a nap, because I told her Americans needed a lot more sleep than Filipinos did, apparently. And the services were amazing. The singing, they have no piano, that nobody in their congregation can play piano. So they have the guitar and then tambourine. And they sing our hymns in their language, and they're kind of upbeat. And it just seems like everybody is putting their whole heart into it, and it just seems to, the Spirit of God just seems to be there. The choruses, I know you've seen movies of that. They have, when the church starts getting sleepy, when you've been sitting there for a while, they have everybody stand up and do Father Abraham. And their Father Abraham is very, very dramatic, and you have everybody from young children to grown men doing these actions, and not the least bit of embarrassment or anything. The youth take very active parts in the services. They call themselves something, Christian Youth CYF, I think it was. And after services, they'd have Bible activities. And the first Bible activity session I went to, and that was the last one I went to, and that was because, they say like a verse in the scripture that isn't even one of the verses that you kind of know. They say any random verse, and somebody stands up in the first 5 seconds, and people are, it just blew my mind. I was definitely not on that level yet. So I've made a pact to study my Bible more and maybe go back again and try again. The messages were some of the best I've heard out of our ministers, their ministers. Their ministers would preach mainly in their language, but every once in a while they would throw in a English sentence or something like that. And I'm a person that has a very short attention span when I'm sitting in church or something like that, but it just seemed like when I was in the services, I was just captivated. Something there. A few weeks ago, I went to Craigsville, and Brother Harley preached a message called The Path of Least Resistance. And when we were in the Philippines, he preached it again. And when I went to Craigsville, I think one person might have went up to the altar for something, not related to salvation or anything like that. But when he preached that message in the Philippines, it was amazing. The first people that you see stand up were half of the ministers. They all stood up and came to the altar. Then just half the congregation came up. They were getting out chairs. People were just kneeling everywhere. Those of us that were sitting in our seats kneeled down, and you could just hear people sobbing. And once that service closed, it took a long time. But once that service closed, people stood up and just had tears streaming down their cheeks. It took sometimes up to a half an hour to get out of the church at nighttime, because everybody shakes everybody's hand and asks you how you are. So you just basically make a circle, and you just have to, how are you? How are you? Hi. And I mean, it's just amazing to see it. And it's not just because they were giving special favors to us. They did it amongst themselves, too. They just made a point to go and see everybody. And I thought that was something really neat. I didn't really feel like I did that much myself. I played my flute a few times. The first time I played my flute, I played the Old Rugged Cross, and I played 2 verses of that. And I was going to go back to my seat, and Sister Judith said, "They want you to play more." So I went back up, and I had them all stand up, and I played Stand Up for Jesus. And it was a neat experience for me. The children were another thing. My ministry, I feel like, is children, and I got all the children one night up on they have like a little roof on their church with a covering, and all the children got in a circle, and we played the game Bubblegum, Bubblegum. And then I had them all sit down in the circle, and we played Hot Potato, and we would sing, "I Have Decided to Follow Jesus." And the kids just loved it. I loved it. We all had so much fun. And then after that, they just kind of flocked towards you. And people, somebody on Facebook told me that the children still have not forgotten that. So that was kind of another neat experience for me. And then the second week, actually seeing more of the different areas of the Philippines was really neat too. Marinduque, I got to go with Sarah, the girl I had met a few months before I went. And I was kind of worried because Dennis gave me a report. We had to take a ferry. And Dennis told me, or we found out that a ferry had sunk, and that they kind of sink pretty regularly. Not regularly, but it's happened more than once. So I was all worked up, and I told them all that I was not going to sleep on the ferry. There was no way I was going to sleep on the ferry. I was going to stay alert with my eyes peeled that way, and in case anything went wrong, I would be ready. And we didn't end up getting on the ferry till midnight. And the ferry took a very long time to take off. So as we're waiting for it to take off, I was asleep probably the minute I sat down. And Brother Hartley teased me the rest of the trip. "I thought you weren't going to fall asleep on the ferry." Overall, the trip just really refocused my priorities, got me recommitted to God's will. I told them they had me, one of the things they didn't really tell you before they'd ask you to do something. So I'd be sitting in a service, and the chairperson would say, "Now we're going to ask Sister Jocelyn to give her testimony." And I would be totally taken off guard. And one time they said, "We're going to hear from the Americans a little bit about their trip. We'll start with Sister Jocelyn." And I got up, and one of the things I told them was that I hoped that I could take a little bit of the Philippines back to America. Just that total life commitment, that giving up of self that you just find over there. I don't know what these people have. I mean, these people have hardly nothing that we have, and yet their lives are just completely focused around God. So it definitely was a convicting trip for me as well. Thank you.